After 23 years of no contact, my golden child brother, who had abused me with our mom's support, reached out to me. For 23 years, I had no contact with my older brother, George. Growing up, my childhood was anything but easy. I'm 40 years old now, the youngest of 3 siblings. George is 45, and our middle brother, Mike, is 43. Mike and I have always been close, but my relationship with George has been strained, to say the least. George was the golden child in our family, seemingly incapable of doing any wrong. While Mike suffered somewhat because of this favoritism, it was nothing compared to what I endured. I don't blame Mike for not stepping in to protect me. He needed to look out for himself, and I understand that. George terrorized me throughout our childhood, making my life a living hell simply because I existed. As a sickly child, I often drew attention away from George, which he resented deeply. Our mother made it clear that she never wanted me. She only had me to try to keep my father, who desperately wanted a daughter. George once pushed me through a glass door when I was 13, leaving scars on my arm. At the time, he was 18, and our mother's reaction was to scream at me for bleeding on the carpet before banishing me to my room. Mike was the one who helped me bandage my wounds until I could get proper medical attention. On my 18th birthday, I left home. I snuck out in the middle of the night with a bag and moved in with my high school boyfriend, who is now my husband. We got married the day after I turned 18 and are still together today, though I don't recommend getting married so young. My mother didn't realize I was gone for 4 days until she called the police to bring me home. I used to stay with my boyfriend and his mother for a few days at a time, and my mother would often call the police to have me brought back. When the police told her they couldn't remove me from my marital home, I wish I could have seen her face. My dad was a weak man. He loved me and cared for me, but he would always give in to whatever my mother wanted for an easy life. He worked long hours to provide for us, which meant he wasn't around much to intervene. After I left home, the only family member I kept in touch with was Mike. Over the years, I allowed limited contact with my dad, making it clear that if my mother or George ever tried to contact me, I would disappear entirely. The only time my request for no contact was broken was when my mother died. My dad messaged me with the news and the funeral details, but I simply replied, "Good," and did not attend. When my father passed away recently, I did attend his funeral. It was the first time I had seen George in years. He tried to approach me several times during the wake, but I always found a way to avoid him. His wife, who I didn't know existed, even tried to corner me in the bathroom to force a conversation. I told her to leave me alone in no uncertain terms, and my husband and I left shortly after. A week after the funeral, I received an email from George at my work address, which is easily found online. Mike confirmed that it was George's email, and he had mentioned at the wake that he would contact me. In the email, George talked about how difficult his life became after I left, his struggles with alcohol and pain medication addiction, and the pressure our mother put on him to succeed. He claimed that therapy had made him realize how awful he had been to me, and that having a daughter of his own opened his eyes to his past behavior. He asked for my forgiveness, hoping it would help him become a better husband and father. I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive. The scars George left on me, both physical and emotional, are still there. I've been seeing a therapist for the last few years and discussed the email with my husband, who advised me to delete it and not let George back into my life. My husband believed George only reached out because I was emotionally vulnerable after losing our dad. In his email, George never specified any particular incident he wanted forgiveness for, making it seem like he wanted to look good rather than genuinely improve himself. I decided to respond, making it clear that he would never receive forgiveness from me. I told him that our lack of contact for 23 years should have been enough time for him to work on himself, but he was still the same self-centered person he had always been. I warned him not to contact me again, or I would go to the police for harassment. I also told him not to try to get information about me from Mike, who knows better than to discuss me with George. I have since marked his email address as spam and reinforced with Mike that I do not want any contact with George. Mike mentioned that George had been trying to find out what I was getting from our father's will, which made me suspect his motives for reaching out. I had asked my dad not to include me in the will to avoid facing George at a will reading, and he respected my wishes. Mike has always said he would share whatever he receives with me, but I've told him to keep it for himself. Nothing in the will could give me back the one thing I truly wanted, my dad.